Hey everyone, tonight we start with something that might sound unbelievable unless it's happened to you too. I woke up on my son's wedding day completely bald, not metaphorically, not from stress. No, I woke up with most of my hair gone. For a moment, lying there in the early lights spilling across the window pane in Lexington, Kentucky, I actually thought I was in some kind of fever dream. My name is Darlene Whitaker, and I'm 67 years old. I've lived a whole life, raised a son, buried a husband, and worked until my bones didn't ache, they just hummed constantly. And today was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. I read every comment, so please share where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now turn off the lights. Maybe let a fan run for some gentle white noise, and let's begin tonight's journey together. My fingers reached for my hair before my brain fully understood what was wrong. I expected to feel the soft silver waves I'd had styled just 2 days earlier, but instead, my hand met bare skin, prickly, uneven, damp with sweat. I lurched to the mirror, and what stared back at me wasn't me. It was a hollow-eyed stranger with jagged patches of hair clinging to her scalp. At first, I couldn't speak. I didn't even cry. I just stood there, frozen, one hand over my mouth, the other gripping the sink like it might anchor me in place. But I knew who had done it. Aubrey, my daughter-in-law, or more accurately, my soon-to-be daughter-in-law. The night before, she and my son Ryan had stayed at a hotel for the rehearsal dinner. But that girl is clever cunning in a way that only people raised with too many mirrors and too few consequences can be. She must have come by after I fell asleep. I had no other enemies. No wild cats had snuck in. No health condition could have made my hair look like it had been hacked by kitchen scissors. I called Ryan, my hand still trembling. "Sweetheart, I need you to come over now." "Mom," his voice was groggy. "It's 6 a.m. The wedding isn't until..." "Your wife cut off all my hair." There was a silence that felt like my phone had disconnected, but then he said, "What are you talking about?" "She came into my room last night," I said, my voice cracking. "She cut it off while I was sleeping." "I'm bald, Ryan." Another pause. "Mom, are you sure this isn't something else?" "Maybe it fell out on its own. Maybe you're stressed." I wanted to scream. Instead, I whispered, "Don't do that. Don't make me doubt what I know." He said he'd come by. When he showed up an hour later, Aubrey was with him. Of course she was. She breezed into my home like she was inspecting an Airbnb, not walking into a personal crisis. Her blonde curls were impeccable, her lipstick a shade of muted coral that screamed, "I win." "Oh my God, Darlene," she gasped, hand to her mouth. "What happened to your hair?" She even stepped closer like she was concerned. "You know what happened," I said. Ryan looked between us, confused, annoyed. "Can someone please explain what's going on? She's accusing me of doing this to her." Aubrey said, her tone trembling with wounded innocence. "Ryan, I was with you all night." "She could have come here after you fell asleep," I said. "You told me last week that your mother was worried about looking old in the wedding photos. So you decided to make sure I wouldn't upstage anyone, didn't you?" Aubrey blinked theatrically. "That's insane. I would never do that." Ryan reached for her hand, sliding his arm around her waist. The gesture wasn't big, but it cut me like a razor. "Mom, I think you should see someone. Maybe a doctor. Hair loss can be, a symptom." "It didn't fall out," I hissed. "It was cut." He sighed. "Can you just not make this about you today? This is our wedding." There it was, that line, the one I'd feared. "Don't make this about you." As if I were some drama magnet pulling attention like a rusty nail pulls iron. Aubrey stepped forward again, voice syrupy. "Maybe we should postpone, just until Darlene is feeling more balanced." I nearly laughed. "Don't you dare postpone this wedding because of what you did." "What I allegedly did," she corrected, her smile tight. Ryan looked tired. "Please let's not turn this into a thing." I watched them leave her heels, clicking on my tile like she was already the queen of my castle. Ryan paused at the door. "Please don't make a scene, Mom. Today's not about you." I didn't respond. I just stared at the reflection in the toaster, a pale, shaky woman in a floral bathrobe with a ruined scalp and a ruined heart. Later that day, I walked into a cheap wig shop 3 towns over. I picked the least offensive synthetic auburn wig I could find. It itched like fiberglass, but it was all I could afford on short notice. I paid in cash and avoided every mirror on the way out. I was supposed to sit in the first row at the chapel, but when I arrived, my name card had been moved to the third. In the front sat Margot Aubrey's mother, glowing in navy silk with hair freshly colored and set. She looked like what I'd meant to look like. Elegant, maternal, important. From my seat in the third row, I watched guests murmur and glance at me, their faces kind but confused, as if something about me was off and they couldn't quite name it. The woman beside me leaned in. "Isn't Margot lovely, so refined?" I nodded and smiled. The same polite smile I'd perfected over the last 3 years since Aubrey had slithered into our lives. Always smile, always agree, never make waves. That morning I lost my hair. But sitting in that church, I realized something deeper. I'd been disappearing for years, and no one, not even my son, had noticed. The reception felt like a punishment I hadn't earned. I was seated at a table in the back near the bar beside people I didn't know, or worse, barely remembered from PTA meetings 20 years ago. Meanwhile, Margot Sinclair was front and center, accepting compliments like a debutante at a Southern cotillion. She had that aura, like everything around her just naturally adjusted to make her shine brighter. And me, I sat in my itchy plastic wig sipping flat ginger ale, watching strangers talk about my son as if I hadn't raised him single-handedly. Someone asked, "Which side of the family are you from?" I smiled that same exhausted smile. "I'm Ryan's mother." "Oh, that's all they said, just, oh." And then they turned away as if the title carried no weight, no importance, no history. I think it was during the speeches that I began to unravel. Ryan stood with a microphone in hand, grinning like a man who had it all. He toasted Margot, thanking her for raising such a poised, elegant woman. He complimented Aubrey's father, commended their family values, and even made a joke about how he hoped their future children would inherit their business smarts. But you know what he didn't mention? Me. Not once. Not my name. Not a passing nod. Not a joke about how his mom raised him to be respectful or how she worked night shifts and still managed to make every piano recital. Nothing. It was like I had never existed. I excused myself before dessert. In the bathroom, the fluorescent light revealed every flaw the wig couldn't hide. I looked like a woman wearing a costume of herself. That's when Margaret walked in, Ryan's third-grade teacher of all people. "Darlene," she said softly, "I almost didn't recognize you. My goodness, I haven't seen you since that science fair." I forced a smile. That was a long time ago. "You were always the one who showed up," she said. "Rain, shine, 2 jobs, you were always there. Ryan used to tell me you were his hero." Hero. I bit my lip hard, because somewhere along the way I'd stopped being that to him. And Margaret, she saw it too. Her eyes dropped to my wig, lingered, and then looked away politely. "I should get back," she said. "It was good seeing you." I nodded. "You too." The cake cutting was happening when I came out, but I didn't move closer. I stood off to the side near the dessert table, trying to blend into the drapes. That's when I heard Aubrey. She was holding court by the head table, surrounded by a group of guests. Her laughter was high melodic, the kind that makes people lean in, whether they care or not. "Oh, you should have seen her this morning," she said. "Ryan's poor mother was convinced I snuck into her house and cut her hair while she slept." Gasps, then laughter. Nervous, confused laughter. Can you imagine Aubrey continued one hand over her heart? "The poor thing is just confused lately. It's really sad." Margot, never missing a cue, chimed in. "Age can be cruel. Some people just can't handle getting older gracefully." My stomach twisted. "She's been struggling," Aubrey added, lowering her voice, though not enough to prevent the room from hearing. "We've been talking about maybe assisted living, just for her peace of mind." Assisted living. That was it. It was like watching someone rewrite your obituary in real time, erasing your name, replacing it with an embarrassing footnote. That's when Margaret, God bless her, appeared again at my side. She'd overheard. "That's awful," she whispered. Why would she say that? Because she wants to be the only woman in Ryan's life. Because she's methodically cutting me out like a tumor. Aubrey spotted me then. "There she is," she said sweetly. "Darlene, we were just talking about you." Her hand beckoned me over like I was some child who'd wandered off. The group turned to face me, their expressions tight with that awkward sympathy people reserve for folks they think have slipped a gear. "How are you feeling, dear?" one woman asked gently. "The way you talk to a nursing home resident who thinks her cat is still alive." "I'm fine," I said, steadying myself. Aubrey placed a hand on my arm, her grip like iron beneath her French manicure. "We're all here for you. That's what family is for." Family. I tasted the word like vinegar. "We were thinking," she continued, "maybe it's time to take a step back. Focus on yourself. Let Ryan build his own life." "Step back," I repeated. "Yes," Margot said. "It's not healthy to rely on your son for emotional support. You need hobbies, friends your own age." They were painting me like a leech, like some pathetic widow who couldn't let go. I stood straighter. "I'm not depending on Ryan. I haven't asked him for anything." "Oh, sweetie," Aubrey purred. "It's not about what you ask, it's about what you expect, and it's just a lot." "I raised him alone," I said. "Worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. I never asked for thanks, but I also didn't expect to be erased." More silence. "You're making a scene," Margot said sharply. I took a breath. "You're right. I think it is time I step back." Aubrey smiled triumphant. "That's wonderful. We all want what's best." "Oh, I know you do," I said. "But don't worry, I'll make sure you never have to worry about me again." And with that, I walked out of the reception. No goodbyes, no final words. Just the steady click of my heels on the marble floor and the sound of something inside me snapping free. Let me tell you something I once read in a forgotten book of Appalachian sayings. You can only tighten a lid so far before the jar cracks. That day I cracked, and from that crack light started to pour in. I didn't cry on the drive home. No crying was for people still hoping someone might care. I'd passed that threshold somewhere between the champagne toast and Margot Sinclair's whispered suggestion that I find purpose through pottery. Instead, I drove in silence, letting the evening air cool the sting on my cheeks. The wig scratched against my scalp, but I refused to remove it, not until I was back in the sanctuary of my own 4 walls. My own kingdom, even if it had started to feel more like exile. I sat on the edge of my bed that night, the same bed where I'd tucked Ryan in for 18 years. The bed I'd climbed into after triple shifts at the hospital, smelling faintly of antiseptic and cafeteria coffee, but still finding enough warmth to kiss him goodnight. I looked at the indent my body had carved over time, the worn quilt my sister Joanna had made me before she passed. I felt the ache of decades settle into my bones, like an unwelcome guest. That's when I remembered the envelope. I reached into the bottom drawer of my dresser and pulled it out thick-sealed and untouched. It had been waiting there for 2 years, Joanna's legacy. $2 million. She'd left it all to me, her only sister. No one else knew. Not Ryan, not Aubrey, not a single soul at that wedding. I hadn't touched it not because I didn't need it, but because Joanna had whispered something in that hospital room, her voice paper-thin and soaked in morphine. "Don't tell anyone. Wait. Watch how they treat you when they think you have nothing. Then you'll know." She'd been right. They thought I had nothing, so they gave me nothing. No kindness, no loyalty, not even a seat in the front row of my own son's wedding. Joanna had always been the wise one. She believed in learning through silence. And that night, for the first time, I heard the silence clearly. It told me I had no place in Ryan's new life, but I had something more powerful. Freedom. The next morning, I opened a blank notebook, the kind you buy with dreams you never write down. And I made a list, a real, raw list. Titled in pen, Darlene's Next Chapter. Remove Ryan from my will. Call Douglas Marks, Joanna's lawyer. Sell the house. Leave Kentucky. Live like the woman they think I'm too old to be. There was something thrilling about it. Scary, sure, but thrilling. I even added a note at the bottom. Buy expensive shampoo, not because I need it, but because I can. That's the kind of woman I wanted to be. The next day, I drove to Douglas's office, a brick building that smelled of cedar and legacy. He greeted me with a handshake and the same gentle calm he'd once offered Joanna. I need to revise my estate, I told him. He didn't blink. Of course. May I ask what prompted the change? I smiled one corner of my mouth, lifting the way Joanna used to. Clarity. He nodded and took notes while I explained. I showed him the scholarship draft I'd written in longhand, a fund for single mothers in nursing school. That was my final gift. Not to blood, but to sacrifice. No provisions for family, he asked gently. None. He paused, pen in hand. Are you sure? Douglas, I said they already made it clear what I'm worth to them. He nodded, and in that moment I swear I saw Joanna behind his eyes smirking like she'd known it all along. Next came the house. I called Barbara Keller, my old realtor and one of the last women I trusted in Lexington. Darlene, she said, surprised. How was the wedding? Life-changing, I replied. I need to sell. She fell silent, then said, You're serious. I'm thinking of relocating. Oregon. I've got a cousin up there, Helen. She's always saying, I need fresh air and less polite suffering. Barbara chuckled. Well, the market's strong. I can have someone by tomorrow. Make it discreet. I don't want neighbors poking around asking questions. When I hung up, I felt giddy. Like a woman who had nothing left to lose and suddenly realized that was a form of wealth. Over the next few days, I moved with quiet purpose. I boxed up old baby clothes, every macaroni frame Ryan had made, every scribbled note from elementary school. Each one whispered, You were once his world. I packed them carefully into labeled bins and drove them across town to a storage unit I paid for 6 months in advance. Because even if he never came back, I wasn't going to be the one who burned the evidence of love. And I'll tell you something strange, when you start reclaiming yourself, you notice weird things. Like how your kitchen feels bigger when you stop feeding the ghosts of people who stopped calling. Or how your smile in the mirror isn't fake when you're alone. That's the one that stings a little, realizing you'd been faking for company and honest only in solitude. One night, I finally visited the little wig shop Aubrey had recommended. I walked in wig askew, looking like a tired librarian caught in a storm. The clerk, a young woman named Lana with pink eyebrows, smiled without judgment. Looking to find yourself or lose someone else, she asked. I laughed out loud. Both. She brought out a few real hair pieces. This one's called the Rebel Grandma. Most women your age think it's too bold. Perfect, I said. When I left with a short silver bob that caught the streetlight like moonlight, I felt 20 years younger and twice as dangerous. And maybe that's the best part of getting older, you finally stop apologizing for taking up space. That's my old age wisdom for this chapter, by the way. Age doesn't shrink you, people do. Don't let them. And here's your quirky fact. Female elephants kick out family members that disrespect the matriarch. They don't do drama, they just exile. I should have been an elephant. As I crawled into bed that night with my new hair and my secret bank account, I stared at the ceiling and whispered to myself, Portland, mountains, lavender tea, nobody calling me dear with pity. For the first time in decades, I didn't fall asleep angry. I fell asleep dreaming. The day the for sale sign went up in my front yard, I didn't flinch. I didn't peek from behind the curtains. I didn't wonder who might whisper down the block. I didn't care if anyone thought I was spiraling. What I did do was make a cup of chamomile tea, stand barefoot on the porch, and sip slowly while Barbara hammered the wooden post into my lawn like a ceremonial stake. Barbara glanced up, brushing hair from her eyes. You're really doing this, huh? Every square inch of it. She smiled, something proud behind her eyes. They're going to regret losing you. I raised my cup like a toast. Let's hope so. That afternoon, I called Helen Monroe in Portland. My second cousin on my mother's side, the kind of family you send Christmas cards to, and secretly envy for their life choices. She was a watercolorist, twice divorced, lived in a tiny craftsman bungalow with a garden full of herbs and loud wind chimes. Helen. I said, I think I'm finally ready to take you up on that offer. She squealed so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. I have the coziest guest room with a patchwork quilt, a bay window, and absolutely no judgment. You'll love it. We set a tentative arrival date 6 weeks out, just enough time to tie up loose ends and pretend I was making a rational decision. I wasn't. I was making a liberation. That week, I started giving things away. Not selling, giving. There's a strange joy in watching someone else light up over an item you've grown numb to, like seeing a dress find a second chance at feeling beautiful. I gave the china hutch to my neighbor, Mrs. Delaney, a widow who'd always admired it but never said so out loud. I gave my late husband's guitar to a teenage busker who played on the corner of Main and Elm every Saturday with a coffee cup for tips and a voice like melted caramel. And I gave my dining room set to a single mom named Carmen. From my book club, she cried when I offered said her kids had been eating off folding chairs for years. Each time I felt lighter, like shedding layers I didn't know I'd been buried under. I even stood in my kitchen one night, running my hand across the countertop Ryan had once spilled grape juice on at age 10, and I said out loud, "You were never just a house, but I can't stay here for a memory." I started researching Portland in earnest. I discovered that there's a bookstore there called Powell's that takes up an entire city block, that the local co-op sells 12 varieties of mushrooms I can't pronounce, and that the seniors hiking club there is so popular it has a wait list for people who wear orthopedic shoes. That's when I knew I'd found my people. I even signed up for a profile on a local volunteer site helping kids at the Children's Hospital with reading and art therapy. No one would know me. No one would expect anything from me but kindness and presence. And that's all I was ready to give. 2 weeks in the house got an offer cash, above asking. Barbara was floored. I've never seen something move this fast. It's almost like the universe wants me gone, I joked. But deep down, I didn't think it was the universe. I thought maybe Joanna was pulling strings. Joanna, who never had time for pity parties, who used to tell me, "You get one day to sulk, Darlene. After that, you slap on lipstick and face the world like you invented confidence." She'd have loved Portland. She'd have hated Aubrey. One night, as I packed a box of old journals, I found one from Ryan's middle school years. It had a purple glitter pen clipped to it, a remnant of a birthday party gone wrong. Flipping through, I found a list Ryan had written when he was 13. Top 5 things I love about Mom. She always makes my eggs the way I like them. She never forgets my band concerts. She tells the truth even when it's hard. She hugs me when I don't ask for it. She believes I'm good even when I'm not. I pressed the paper to my chest and closed my eyes. 13-year-old Ryan had loved me without apology. 35-year-old Ryan had forgotten how. And maybe that's what hurt the most. Not the betrayal, not the silence, not even the wedding spectacle. It was the loss of that child, the one who once thought I hung the moon. Here's today's old age wisdom. Love is like handwriting, it fades if you stop using it. And your quirky fact octopuses have 3 hearts, but when they fall in love, one of them stops working. If that isn't poetic tragedy, I don't know what is. I wonder how many of my emotional ventricles stopped functioning the day Ryan picked Aubrey's performance over my truth. And I wondered how many had restarted since I started choosing myself. On Sunday morning, I sat in my kitchen with the sunrise drinking black coffee and planning my goodbye. Not a note or a speech, those were for people who expected closure. I wanted something quieter. I took out a stack of envelopes and started labeling them. One for Ryan, one for the women in my book club, one for Mrs. Delaney, one for the scholarship foundation I'd already wired the first deposit to. Each letter was short, honest. No guilt, just the truth as I saw it, my version of peace. And I ended each one with the same phrase, "Please don't find me, let me find myself." When I sealed the last envelope, I felt something shift. The weight of motherhood expectation performance, it all dropped like a coat you didn't realize was soaking wet. I stood up straighter. I ran my fingers over my new wig. And I whispered, "Watch me go," because in the silence left behind by those who discounted me, I'd found something miraculous. My voice. And I wasn't going to let it be silenced again. Packing the photo albums was the hardest part. Not because I was sentimental. Well, okay, maybe I was a little. But mostly because each image felt like a frozen moment where love still lived without conditions. There was Ryan at age 6, missing a front tooth holding a frog like it was made of gold. And there was me with a perm that should have been a felony crouching beside him, laughing so hard my eyes were closed. I stared at that photo for longer than I'd planned, because in that tiny rectangle, I was still his whole world. And I'd believed back then that I always would be. But here's a hard-earned insight: you can't mother someone into loving you forever. You can only give and then one day let go. I wrapped the albums in tissue paper like they were relics from a time when magic was real and trust didn't need a receipt. By week 3, the house was nearly empty. What remained were echoes, and echoes weren't something you could box. Then one night, as the Kentucky summer sky pulsed with heat, lightning, and crickets, my phone rang. The caller ID said Ryan. I stared at it like it had betrayed me. My thumb hovered over the green button, but I didn't press it. The voicemail came through seconds later. Hey, Mom. I just wanted to check in. We haven't heard from you, and Bellamy's a little worried. I know the wedding stuff was weird, and maybe we didn't handle it well, but just call me when you can. Okay. Weird. That was his word for it. A public gaslighting and erasure of my existence, and it was weird. I didn't call back. I wasn't ready, and more importantly, I didn't owe anyone readiness. The next day, the mail brought something unexpected, a handwritten card from Helen in Portland. The envelope had floral stamps and her looping handwriting that looked like it belonged on jam jars. Inside it read, Darlene. The second bedroom is ready. I bought a fresh set of linens and aired out the quilt. There's a place here for you, not just a room, a place to start again. Come home when you're ready. H. I pressed the card to my chest like it might anchor me to a world where people didn't make you earn their love through compliance. Later that night, I made a list. Not a to-do list, a to-be list. Things I wanted to be in Portland. Unapologetically myself. A woman who wears red lipstick on a Tuesday. A reader of books I never had time for. A friend who shows up. A person who never ever silences herself again. That last one, it got underlined. Twice. I taped the list to the inside of a box marked personal, alongside my favorite mug, my journal, and the lavender sachets Joanna used to keep in her sock drawer. I imagined Joanna nodding approvingly somewhere beyond this life. She'd always said, Darlene, if you ever feel small in a room, it's not because you are, it's because they've dimmed the lights. And I was tired of living in rooms that made me feel invisible. One morning, Barbara Keller called to say the buyer wanted to close early. You'll need to be out by next Thursday, she said. Perfect, I said without missing a beat. The only wrinkle Ryan found out. 2 days later, I was wrapping dishes in newspaper when I heard the lock rattle. I turned to see him standing in the hallway, still holding the key I'd given him nearly 20 years ago. He looked older than I remembered, or maybe just tired, maybe both. Mom, he said. Ryan. There was an entire continent of silence between us. He took in the half-packed kitchen, the open boxes, the shipping labels with Oregon zip codes. You're really leaving? I nodded. I am. He ran a hand through his hair. Why didn't you tell me? I set down the bubble wrap. Because you didn't want me to depend on you. I assumed that included announcements. He flinched. That's not what I meant. No, I said softly, but it's what you implied. He moved closer. Look, Bellamy. She gets intense sometimes, but she's not a bad person. She cut my hair in my sleep. You can't prove that. There it was. I felt something cold settle in my spine. The realization that even now, even with all the cracks showing, he'd still rather live in denial than see the truth. I don't need proof, I said. I have peace, and I'm not trading it for validation. He swallowed hard. We're family. Then you should have acted like it. Silence again. And then to my complete astonishment, he looked around the room, this room where he'd once spilled milk and learned to tie his shoes, and his eyes filled with tears. I don't know how to fix this. I walked over, placed my hand on his shoulder, and looked him in the eye. You don't have to fix anything. You just have to let go of the idea that I'll always be waiting. A breeze blew in through the open window. It carried the scent of hydrangeas and the unmistakable clarity of finality. He nodded slowly. Will you call me when you get there? Maybe. That was the truth. Maybe I would. Maybe I wouldn't. Because for the first time in 67 years, I wasn't anyone's default anymore. Here's your quirky fact of the day: butterflies taste with their feet. It's not elegant, but it gets the job done. Kinda like me. I watched my son walk out of the house for what might be the last time. He didn't slam the door. He didn't shout. He just left. And I didn't chase him. That night, I wrote a postcard to Helen. Tell Portland to set the table. I'm coming hungry for life. The plane touched down in Portland beneath a sky the color of wet stone. As I stepped out of the airport, a soft drizzle kissed my cheeks like the Pacific Northwest's version of a welcome mat. Helen met me at the curb in her little forest green Subaru, a thermos of coffee in the cup holder, and a folded blanket on the passenger seat. "You look taller," she said. "It's the wig," I quipped, and we both laughed. But she wasn't wrong. Freedom straightens your spine in ways you don't expect. We drove through tree-lined streets that reminded me of postcards, maples, and birches, swaying like dancers in a gentle ballet of breeze. I rolled the window down slightly, breathing in damp earth moss, and something electric I hadn't felt in years possibility. "You okay?" Helen asked. "I don't know," I said, "but I'm definitely not okay." That night, I settled into the guest room, which was painted a pale lavender and smelled faintly of eucalyptus. Helen had stocked the closet with hangers and placed a vase of fresh tulips on the dresser. It was more than a room. It was a message. "You matter here." The next morning, over pancakes and bacon, Helen handed me a flyer for the local community center. "They're looking for volunteers," she said, flipping her eggs with surgical precision. "Hospital visits, reading to kids, mentoring single moms." I raised an eyebrow. "That's subtle, huh?" She shrugged. "You're not the type to just sit around." She was right. By the end of the week, I'd signed up to volunteer at the Children's Hospital on Mondays and joined a Wednesday book club that met at the Whistling Bean, a coffee shop that served something called lavender honey flat whites. One sip, and I decided if this was liberal West Coast nonsense, I was all in. Funny how quickly life expands when you stop shrinking to fit inside other people's boxes. One day, while shelving books at the hospital's tiny library, I met Camille Torres, the hospital's part-time hairstylist who volunteered on her days off. "I specialize in silver," she said with a wink, twirling a lock of her own salt and pepper hair. "Gray isn't a resignation. It's a statement." We hit it off immediately. She gave me her card. I booked an appointment. When I walked out of her chair, I looked in the mirror and saw someone I hadn't met before, but somehow recognized instantly. My hair, newly trimmed and shaped, framed my face like punctuation around a sentence that finally made sense. "You don't need to pretend anymore," Camille said, brushing a strand behind my ear. "I'm not," I told her. "Not a single strand of me is pretending." Back at Helen's, I journaled that night for the first time in years. I wrote down things that made me feel like myself. When I speak and someone listens, the smell of bookstores, laughing until my stomach hurts, wearing earrings for no one but me, when silence feels safe instead of sharp. As I closed the notebook, I realized something I didn't miss home, because this was home now. Not a place, but a feeling. And that feeling was me. Still, old ghosts like to visit when you least expect them. That weekend, I stopped by a local farmer's market. I was admiring some hand-thrown ceramic mugs when I saw a familiar figure across the way, tall, sharp-angled, with blonde hair pulled into a tight bun. My heart stalled. It wasn't Bellamy, just someone who looked like her, but the flash of fear, the instinct to shrink, to disappear, that was real. I clutched the mug tighter and turned to leave, and then I stopped. I turned back around and bought the mug, a bright turquoise one with a chipped lip and a crooked handle. Perfectly imperfect. Back home, I brewed tea and sipped from the wonky mug like it was a chalice. Later that night, Helen knocked gently on my door. "You got something," she said, holding out an envelope. My stomach dropped. The handwriting on the front was Ryan's. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I placed it on the nightstand and stared at it under the lamplight. "You're allowed to pause," I reminded myself. And then I tucked it in a drawer. The next morning, I hiked up Forest Park with Helen and her neighbor, Gregory Nash, a retired high school teacher with a quick wit and knees that cracked in stereo with mine. "Ever been married?" he asked as we reached the overlook. "Once, widow." He nodded. "Same? Twice." "Twice. Turns out I'm slow at learning." We laughed, and for a moment, the kind of moment that feels like a whisper from the universe, I felt a flicker of warmth that wasn't just from the sunshine. Afterward, over bagels and coffee, Helen leaned in and whispered, "He's cute, right?" I gave her a look. "Don't you start matchmaking." Too late. We both laughed, loudly, unapologetically. And there it was, my quirky fact for the day. Laughter strengthens your immune system, lowers stress, and burns calories. It's basically a free gym membership. So I laughed more. a lot more. I also started sleeping better. Not because I wasn't grieving, grief doesn't vanish. It just grows smaller as your world grows larger. My life, once a single overburdened thread stretched thin by other people's needs, had become a tapestry. Colorful, mismatched, but entirely mine. And that's when I opened the letter. Ryan's words were raw, apologetic, hesitant. He said he missed me. He said things were strained with Bellamy. He said he didn't know who he was anymore. And for once, I didn't feel responsible for fixing that. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on the porch, and watched the sun slip behind the pines. Then I whispered to the wind, "I'm glad you miss me. I finally miss me too." The letter stayed on the kitchen counter for days. I didn't reply, not out of cruelty, but because for the first time in my life, I was learning the difference between reacting and responding. And sometimes, wisdom means sitting in the quiet long enough to hear your own voice over the noise of obligation. Instead, I poured my energy into living. I joined a Thursday night trivia group at a local pub called the Sleepy Fox, where I learned that the national animal of Scotland is the unicorn, and that I'm surprisingly good at 90s pop music questions. Go figure. Every small adventure felt like a rebellious act because I wasn't doing them to prove anything. I wasn't waiting for someone to notice or applaud. I was just existing, and that honestly was more healing than any apology could offer. But don't get me wrong, there were still moments that pinched. Like when I received an email from my old book club back in Lexington asking if I'd like to join a Zoom reunion. Or when Facebook showed me a memory from Ryan's high school graduation, me in a sun hat squinting with pride, his arm wrapped tightly around my shoulders. He used to call me the general back when he was little. Not out of fear, but because I always had a plan, a schedule, a color-coded list of snacks. He used to say, "The general's got this," and I'd nod and say, "Always." So many years where I was everything, and then, nothing. It's funny how motherhood is the only job where doing it right eventually makes you obsolete. That week, I was invited to a potluck at the community center. I brought my famous lemon bars, though they were only famous to me, and set them beside a platter of deviled eggs shaped like sunflowers. "Did you make these?" I asked the woman arranging them. "Nope," she said. "Pinterest lied to me, but I tried." Her name was Deborah, and she had 3 cats, a titanium hip, and a laugh that sounded like popcorn in a skillet. We sat together and swapped stories of bad first dates, microwave disasters, and the time she accidentally dyed her hair green with expired conditioner. "I looked like the Hulk's aunt," she said, wheezing. I told her about the time I wore 2 different shoes to a job interview and didn't notice until I sat down. "Did you get the job?" "No," I said, "but I did start a trend in asymmetrical footwear." She slapped the table. "You're dangerous with tea in your system." That night, walking home, I felt that tickle again, that spark of being seen. Not as a mom or a widow or a cautionary tale. Just as Darlene. I thought about writing back to Ryan again. Not to lecture or guilt him, but just to share a piece of this new self. But instead, I baked more lemon bars and dropped them off at the hospital lounge. Camille texted later, "Your bars caused a sugar riot. You may be banned for kindness." I replied, "Then I'll go down sweet." There's a strange power in anonymity. In this new city, no one looked at me with pity. No one measured my worth against past sacrifices. I was just a woman with a nice laugh, decent baking skills, and a surprisingly adventurous streak when it came to weird kombucha flavors. One day, I found myself on a park bench with Gregory Nash again. He'd invited me for a poetry reading in the Arboretum, a monthly event hosted by local seniors who refused to be quiet about their feelings. We sipped cider from paper cups as a retired dentist read a piece called Root Canal of the Soul, and I nearly choked trying not to laugh. "Poetry is subjective," Gregory whispered. "So is pain," I whispered back. As the sun slipped behind the trees, he turned to me. "Have you always been this interesting, Darlene?" I smiled. "No, I used to be wallpaper." "Looks like you finally peeled yourself off the wall." There it was, my old age insight of the week. Sometimes it takes being erased to remember how to draw yourself back in. We walked back to the parking lot, slowly hands brushing once then again until they stayed connected like puzzle pieces too long apart. No fireworks, no violins, just comfort steady and true. The next morning, I opened my mailbox to find another envelope from Ryan. 2 letters in a month. I was tempted to call the Vatican. This one was shorter, a single page. Mom, I saw your lemon bars on Camille's Instagram. I'd know that powdered sugar pattern anywhere. I showed Bellamy and she said I was imagining things. Then she accused me of spying on you. Said I was obsessed with someone who didn't even want to be part of our lives anymore. She packed a bag. I think she's staying at her mother's for a while. I don't know what that means for us, but I know what it means for me. I miss you. I'm sorry I wasn't braver. Love, Ryan. I sat at the table rereading his words until they blurred. Then I reached for my notepad and wrote 3 lines. I'm not mad at you, but I am busy becoming someone I like again. When I have more to give, I'll let you know. I folded the note, slipped it into an envelope, and added a sprig of lavender from the garden. Then I went to Camille's, let her trim my hair again, and told her I was ready for something a little different. Bold, she asked. No, I said, just enough to remind me I'm still changing. The house I'd found in Portland wasn't big, just a 2-bedroom bungalow tucked into a quiet cul-de-sac where squirrels ran like they were on caffeine and neighbors waved like we were all in the same sitcom. But it was mine. No ghosts in the walls, no expectations lingering in the corners, just space to breathe. Each morning I'd rise with the sun, make my one perfect cup of coffee, and sit in the little nook I called the thinking corner. It overlooked a maple tree that turned a fiery orange every fall. I liked pretending it was applauding me for making it this far. Sometimes it felt like a small miracle to be this peaceful. I wasn't healing for anyone else's benefit anymore. I wasn't polishing myself back into someone they'd want at their table. I was becoming someone I wanted at my own. Then came the phone call, a number I didn't recognize. But something told me to pick up. Hello? Mom, his voice cracked like an old vinyl. Ryan! Silence. Then a shaky breath. She left. I waited, not coldly, just calmly. He needed to say it out loud. Aubrey's gone. Packed everything she cared about into 2 suitcases. Left the houseplants and me. I blinked slowly, letting it settle. I'm sorry, I said softly. She said I was too attached to you, that I never learned to put her first. I didn't say anything. Just let the words hang in the air, gently sagging under their own weight. She's not wrong, he added. I was always comparing her to you, not consciously, but you were the standard. She hated that. I almost laughed. Not a mean laugh, a tired one. The kind that knows irony better than it wants to. Ryan, I said, are you calling because you need your mother or because you finally miss her? He sighed. Both, maybe more. I didn't rush to fix it. I didn't ask how he was eating or if he needed help. Instead, I asked the one question I wish someone had asked me years ago. What do you want? I want to understand how I let it all get so far away, he said. I want to know who you are now. Because I think I never really saw you not as a woman. I looked down at my free hand resting on the table, stronger than I remembered, steadier. I'm someone who stopped asking permission to matter, I said. He was quiet again. Then can I come visit? I closed my eyes. My instinct was to say yes to open the door and set the table and make everything easy. But instinct was what had gotten me hurt before. Eventually I said, not yet. He didn't argue, didn't beg. Okay, he said. When you're ready, I'll be here. After we hung up, I made myself a grilled cheese sandwich with sourdough and 3 kinds of cheese because I could. I sat on the back porch and watched the hummingbirds fight over the feeder like caffeinated toddlers. And I thought maybe that was growth, knowing when to say yes but choosing to wait anyway. 2 days later, Gregory showed up at my door holding a small plant in a clay pot. It's called a resurrection fern, he said, handing it to me. I stared at the brittle brown leaves. You bought me a dead plant. Not dead, he grinned. Dormant. Looks like nothing now but splash some water on it, and by morning it'll unfurl. Comes back to life no matter how dry it's been. I carried it to the windowsill. That's either poetic or a warning. Maybe both. We had tea on the porch, and he told me about his time as a high school teacher, the kids he missed, the ones who came back years later to say thank you. You never know which seeds you planted actually took, he said. Some just take longer to bloom. I thought of Ryan again, of who he might become if no one was trimming him into someone else's shape. I didn't raise a bad son, I said aloud. I just loved him before he knew how to receive it. Gregory nodded slowly, and now I'm loving myself with the same intensity. That night, I watered the resurrection fern and placed it next to my lemon-scented candle. I whispered to it, like a friend, I know what it's like to come back from dry seasons. And I meant it. The next morning, it bloomed. Soft green, unexpected. Just like me. At the community center's craft night, I signed up for a mosaic class. I'd never been artsy, but something about smashing tiles into beautiful chaos appealed to me. The instructor, a wiry woman named Mo, told us the cracks are what make it interesting. She had purple hair and a tattoo of a snail on her wrist. You can't create something meaningful if you're afraid to break things first, she added. I built a garden stepping stone with broken bits of old teacups. In the center, I spelled out, still blooming. Gregory helped me plant it near my lavender bush the next weekend. It looked like it had always belonged there. That was the quirky fact of the week, by the way. Lavender attracts bees, calms anxiety, and in ancient Rome was used to scent bathwater during military campaigns. The Romans apparently loved a good battlefield soak. So do I minus the battlefield. Later that week, Ryan sent a photo. It was of him holding a new plant, a tiny cutting of some kind, green and stubborn. He wrote, trying something new. Maybe I'll grow too. I smiled, then typed back one word, water daily. A week later, my front porch was covered in cardboard boxes again, but not the kind that signified leaving. These were full of intention. Books I'd been meaning to read, some secondhand pottery from a local artisan, and a brand new kettle that whistled like a polite scream. My home was growing with me taking on colors and corners I didn't have the nerve to decorate before. And in that growth, something strange happened. I began forgiving myself. Not just for the mistakes I'd made as a mother, but for all the years I let people walk past me like I was part of the furniture. I forgave the younger version of myself who thought love meant being silent, small, and endlessly available. That part of me was exhausted, so I let her rest. I didn't call Ryan. I didn't feel the need to. He had my address, my last letter, and if he wanted more, he knew how to ask. But what he didn't know, what no one knew, was that in the bottom drawer of my dresser, sealed in an envelope marked "in case of emergency," was everything he used to be to me. That's where I kept the photo of him on his first day of kindergarten, smiling with a gap in his teeth backpack, too big for his little body. It still smelled faintly of baby shampoo and Crayola. There was also a copy of the Mother's Day card he made in second grade. He'd written, "You make grilled cheese better than anyone. Even God." I figured if God was up there reading my mail, he'd understand the compliment. But the most precious item was a cassette tape. Ryan's voice at 10 years old singing "You Are My Sunshine" on an old karaoke machine we bought at a yard sale. I didn't play it, not yet. But just knowing it was there, that past version of us preserved in magnetic whispers, gave me a kind of peace I hadn't felt since the days of Saturday morning cartoons and spilled cereal. At my next book club, Helen Monroe leaned over and whispered, "You've got a glow about you lately, Darlene. Is it that charming gentleman with the teacher smile?" I laughed a real belly laugh that startled even me. "Gregory. He's just a friend." She sipped her chai. That's how it starts. Truth be told, Gregory had become a fixture in my new life, always showing up with some strange plant or an obscure trivia fact. Last Tuesday, he told me that cows have best friends, and when they're separated, their heart rates spike from stress. I don't know what startled me more, the sweetness of the fact, or how instantly I thought, I hope I never become someone's source of stress again. That night, I found myself watching the sunset from my backyard. Portland light is softer somehow, as if the sky's apologizing for the rain. I thought about all the times I'd waited by the window for Ryan to visit, only to make excuses for why he didn't. He's busy. She's probably got a lot planned for them. Maybe next weekend. But the truth was I was just another item on his checklist, something to be crossed off for good son points. And I was done being someone's obligation. Still, when the letter arrived, I was surprised. It came on a Saturday, handwritten again. My name in neat, deliberate strokes that hinted at hesitation. Inside, "Dear Mom, I went to therapy. Real therapy, not the kind where you lie to make yourself sound better. The therapist said something that rattled me. Children owe their parents love, but not blind loyalty. And parents owe their children love, but not martyrdom. I didn't know how to respond to that. I thought being loved by you meant I never had to question myself, that your love would always be there no matter how I treated it. But now I see that love without boundaries isn't love, it's erasure. I'm sorry for how I erased you. I read the letter 3 times. Each time I caught a new tremor in the words. Then I set it down beside the kettle and stared out the kitchen window. The resurrection fern was blooming again. I called Gregory. Feel like a hike. He laughed. Always. What's the occasion? No occasion. Just want to hear myself breathe. We picked a trail that wound along a ridge with views of the river. I wore my sun hat and carried trail mix like a seasoned hiker, even though I still called it fancy walking. About halfway up, we stopped on a bench overlooking the trees. You're quieter today, Gregory noted. I'm thinking about echoes, I said. He raised an eyebrow. About how long it takes for sound to come back to you depending on how far it had to travel. You mean Ryan's letter? I nodded. It's an echo. Late but true. He reached over and squeezed my hand. You don't have to respond right away. I know, I said, but this time I think I want to. Back home, I pulled out a new piece of paper. The kind with tiny pressed flowers in the border, one of those little luxuries I never used before, because I was always saving nice things for later. No more saving. I wrote, Dear Ryan, I'm proud of you, not for going to therapy, not for writing, but for realizing that love requires presence. We're not the same people anymore. You're not the little boy with chocolate on his cheeks, and I'm not the mother who always says yes. But maybe in this new space, we can meet each other again, this time as real people. Let's see what that looks like. I sealed it. No grand speech, no manipulation, just an honest reach across the space between us. Sometimes the scariest thing is letting someone return after they've wounded you. But scar tissue isn't just evidence of pain, it's proof of healing. The letter was out of my hands, now dropped gently into the blue mailbox outside the co-op market I like to visit on Wednesdays. It clanked into the bin with a finality that made my pulse slow down. I didn't expect a reply, not because I didn't think Ryan would write back, but because for the first time in my life, the reply didn't matter. What mattered was that I had spoken my truth clearly and kindly. That was enough. A few days later, Helen and I were sipping chamomile tea in her sunroom, our knees wrapped in matching knit blankets she insisted on giving all her friends. Hers had embroidered lilacs. Mine had tiny stitched pine cones. You really never remarried, she asked, eyes scanning me like I'd left something out. Never even dated seriously, I said. There wasn't room. Room, she echoed. Room for me, I clarified. I was so busy being a mother, a nurse's aide, a housekeeper, a bookkeeper, a shoulder, a calendar, a safety net. By the end of the day, there wasn't anything left for a partner. Helen nodded slowly. I stayed with my husband 15 years too long because I thought being lonely in a marriage was better than being lonely alone. That's debatable, I said with a small smile. And it is academically debatable if we're being technical. Loneliness inside a relationship wears a different skin. It's not the ache of silence, it's the loudness of dismissal, like shouting across a canyon and hearing nothing but your own echo. That was the kind of silence I'd lived with in the years before I left Lexington. Ryan never said it outright, but he'd started treating me like I was a relic, something to be dusted off for the holidays and then tucked back on the shelf. Well, I wasn't anyone's antique anymore. In Portland, I was weirdly popular. Sarah, my new hairdresser, said the senior community had been buzzing about me after the local church's craft fair. You're mysterious but warm, she told me while snipping away at my hair. I laughed. That's just a fancy way of saying I show up and keep my mouth shut. Sarah leaned closer. You know, Darlene, most people who move here spend a year trying to figure out who they are without their titles. You walked in like you already knew. Maybe I had. Or maybe I was just finally listening to the version of myself I used to quiet down for other people's comfort. Later that week, Gregory showed up with a thermos of homemade lentil soup and said, You need to teach me how to make that pear cobbler. I blinked. I didn't make the cobbler. You didn't? Nope. Helen did. I brought salad. He looked sheepish. Well, your salad dressing was amazing. It was from a bottle, I admitted. We laughed deep, real laughter that felt like it pushed old grief out of my lungs to make room for something easier to carry. Gregory was becoming something I hadn't expected familiar, but not in that codependent sacrifice everything kind of way. He wasn't trying to fix me. He wasn't trying to complete me. He just showed up, quietly, gently, consistently. One night, we went to an outdoor movie in the park. The air was warm with that late summer softness that feels like it's apologizing for the heat. He brought popcorn and bug spray. I brought a blanket and 2 bottles of lemon soda. Halfway through the film, he reached for my hand without saying a word. I didn't pull away. I didn't lean in either. I just let it be. Because not everything needs to be defined or explained. Some things just are. Like the way cats find the warmest spot in the house, or how the smell of fresh bread can make you cry unexpectedly. That night back home, I pulled out the cassette tape of Ryan singing "You Are My Sunshine." For the first time, I played it. The static came first, then his little voice off-key, full of heart. "You'll never know, dear, how much I love you." I pressed a hand to my mouth as tears welled up, not sad tears, not angry ones either, just the kind that come when you realize something beautiful happened once, even if it didn't last the way you hoped. Later that week, a package arrived. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. Inside was a photo album. On the first page, a note written in the corner. "I found these, thought they should be with you." The pictures were from all the years I documented. Obsessively school plays, birthdays, soccer games, random Tuesdays when Ryan lost a tooth or got a new backpack. I thought I'd lost them in the shuffle of moving, but here they were restored and whole. Page after page, the boy I raised stared back at me with chocolate-stained cheeks and crooked smiles. One photo in particular stopped me cold. It was Ryan, age 11, standing next to me at a science fair. I was wearing my nursing scrubs name tag still on because I'd rushed straight from work. He was holding a papier-mâché volcano. In the picture, I was smiling with exhaustion, but also with pride. I remember that night. We got second place. On the back of the photo, he'd scribbled, "Best mom, always shows up." I sat with that line for a long time. Always shows up. No, I hadn't been perfect. I hadn't made cobbler or cut crusts off his sandwiches, but I'd shown up for every scraped knee, every late-night fever, every moment that mattered. I didn't need an apology for the rest. I just needed to know that once it had been seen, and now I did. I started carrying the photo in my wallet. It sounds silly, I know, like something an overly sentimental grandma might do, but for me, it wasn't about clinging to the past. It was a reminder of the one version of Ryan I wanted to remember, the boy who knew even if the man had forgotten. That small photo curled at the edges carried more truth than any apology ever could. Helen and I started hosting Sunday suppers. Just a few folks from the neighborhood, a rotating cast of single seniors, retirees, and once even, the local mail carrier who stayed for dessert. Everyone brought a dish, and I brought the stories. "You've got a gift," Helen said one evening as I recounted the tale of how I once glued my nursing shoes to the floor, trying to reattach a broken heel with super glue. "I've got a lot of practice," I replied. "When people don't ask how you are, sometimes you learn to tell stories that make them stay long enough to listen." That got a knowing hum from Mrs. Park, who raised her teacup. Here's to stories louder than silence. We toasted. It wasn't just storytelling, though. It was belonging. A quiet, easy kind. I wasn't performing for approval or begging for recognition. I was just part of things. Like a well-worn quilt laid across the back of the couch, present, reliable, comforting in its familiarity. One morning, while walking back from the bookstore, I ran into Gregory at the community garden. "Darlene," he called out, "you up for a road trip?" My eyebrows lifted. Define road trip. There's a small jazz festival in Cannon Beach next weekend. I've got an extra ticket. I thought, well, maybe you'd like a change of scenery. Jazz wasn't really my thing, but the beach. The open road with a thermos of good coffee and nothing but miles ahead, that I could do. We drove with the windows cracked, letting in the salty breeze. At one point, he turned on the radio and sang along badly to some 70s soul hit. "Did you ever sing to Ryan when he was little?" he asked out of nowhere. I paused. Every night. "What was the song, 'You Are My Sunshine'?" He smiled and started humming it softly. I didn't join in, but I didn't stop him either. We arrived at the coast just as the sun was dipping low, casting everything in that golden light that makes even gas stations look romantic. The music was mellow, the crowd full of silver-haired couples and retirees wearing sun hats with enthusiasm. Gregory offered me his arm as we walked to the beachfront stage. I took it. Not because I needed support, but because I wanted the contact. That was new. That night, we sat on a bench watching waves roll in, eating shrimp po' boys from a food truck, and laughing about how terrible we both were at remembering musicians' names. "I'm glad you came," he said. "Me too." He glanced at me a little tentative. "You ever think about letting someone back in, not from your past, but you know someone new?" I considered that. "I think about not shutting the door completely," I said. "That's a start." And it was. Later that week, I got another letter. This time, it was shorter. "Dear Mom, Bellamy moved out. She said I'd changed. I told her she was right. I'm in therapy now. Not because she told me to go, but because I finally realized I've got work to do. I don't expect anything. Just wanted you to know I'm trying. Love, Ryan." I read it twice. Then once more for the parts between the lines. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a guilt trip. It was a thread offered, not demanded. That mattered. Helen saw the envelope on my counter and raised an eyebrow. "You gonna answer that?" "Eventually. You always were patient." "No," I said, laughing softly. "I just used to confuse patience with self-neglect." That night, I sat at my desk, pulled out the same stationery, and wrote back. "Dear Ryan, thank you for your honesty. I'm glad you're seeking healing not for me, but for yourself. I'll always care for you, but I no longer live in a world where love equals sacrifice. That's a hard truth to learn. I'm still learning it myself. If we rebuild, it'll be slowly, as equals, as two adults who know that love without respect is just sentimentality. I hope you keep growing. And if one day we sit across from each other, again, two whole people with open hearts, I'll be glad to listen, but not to fix, not to carry. With hope, Darlene." As I sealed the envelope, I felt a peace settle into my chest. I had no idea if he'd reply, and that was okay, because not all endings are tidy. Not all bridges are rebuilt, but some are. And sometimes, just knowing you've laid your stone on the path is enough. The sun was rising soft and golden when I woke the next morning, Portland's version of a gentle pat on the back. I brewed my usual cup of coffee, drizzled in the good creamer, and stood by the window while the scent of cinnamon toast drifted through the kitchen. The photo in my wallet still there. But it didn't feel like armor anymore, just a part of me, like a scar you stop covering. Around 9, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and Portland's usually too polite for surprise visits. When I opened the door, Gregory stood there with a carton of blueberries and a sheepish smile. "Said they were just picked this morning," he explained, lifting the box. "I was at the farmer's market and thought you might want some." I stepped aside to let him in. "Only if you're staying for pancakes." He laughed, twist my arm. We made breakfast in that easy rhythm that people fall into when they've stopped pretending. Gregory whisked while I chopped walnuts, and we debated if cinnamon belonged in everything. It does. After we ate, we sat on the back porch, 2 mugs of coffee warming our hands, watching the neighbor's cat try and fail to catch a butterfly. "I got your note," he said, eventually eyes not leaving the yard, "about Ryan." "I think you did the right thing. Boundaries aren't walls, you know. They're doors with locks. You decide who gets a key." I tilted my head. "Did you just come up with that?" He grinned, stole it from my therapist. I chuckled. "Remind me to book with her." We spent the day running errands together, post office dry cleaner, a stop at the garden center for a new basil plant I didn't need. I let myself lean into it. The small, ordinary magic of being seen and liked for no reason other than being exactly who I was. That night, I finally did something I hadn't had the nerve to do since I moved. I called Ryan. The phone rang once, twice, then picked up with a cautious mom. I didn't speak at first. I just let the sound of his voice float there. "Hi, Ryan." He exhaled, half relief, half grief. "I didn't think you'd call." I wasn't sure I would either. Another silence, but this one was softer. "I got your letter," he said. "I've read it more times than I should admit." "Good. Mom." He paused, trying to gather 1,000 unspoken things into one sentence. "I miss you." I know. More silence. This one hung heavier. I'm sorry, he said finally. I know that too. We didn't make promises. We didn't rehash the past. But before we hung up, I told him one truth that had been sitting in my heart like an unopened envelope. Ryan, I still love you. That hasn't changed. But what has changed is me, and that's a good thing. He didn't argue. He just whispered, okay. I slept soundly that night. The next few weeks moved in that gentle rhythm only quiet happiness can create. I went hiking with the senior group, tried a clay sculpting class. Turns out I'm all thumbs and even sang karaoke at Helen's insistence. I butchered a Dolly Parton song with such enthusiasm that they begged me to do it again next week. Gregory and I kept spending time together, no labels, no expectations, just two people who knew the value of earned peace. One morning, I found a small package at my door. Inside was a framed photo, me and Ryan from when he was 8, both of us grinning after a pie-eating contest at the county fair. There was a note. You were always enough, Mom. I just didn't see it. I'm trying to now. Love, Ryan. I sat with that photo in my lap, tears welling up, not the aching kind, but the kind that clean out corners you didn't even realize were dusty. Old wisdom tells us forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves. That's true. But sometimes it's also a soft reopening of a door you thought was sealed shut forever. Later that week, Ryan texted, thinking of coming to Portland next month. Just me. No agenda, no expectations, just coffee. I stared at the message for a long time and finally wrote back, coffee sounds nice. I know a place with terrible scones and excellent light, because maybe we weren't rebuilding everything. Maybe we were just rebuilding enough to start again with eyes open. The cafe I picked for our meeting wasn't fancy. It had chipped mugs, creaky chairs, and the kind of old jazz playing low in the background that made you feel like the world outside could wait. It was the kind of place I'd grown to love, unpretentious, warm, and just off the beaten path enough that you had to want to be there. That morning I wore my favorite blue sweater, the one with the worn cuffs and tiny coffee stain that never quite came out. I didn't dress to impress. I dressed to feel me. When Ryan walked in, he looked older than I remembered. Not just in the lines around his eyes or the few gray strands near his temples, but in the way he carried himself. Slower, maybe. Softer. Like life had finally tapped him on the shoulder and said, hey, it's time to pay attention. He spotted me near the window and smiled, tentative, unsure. I stood and gave him a quick, one-armed hug. Not out of coldness, just calibration. A test run. Hey, Mom. Hey, kid. We sat. He fidgeted with his spoon while I sipped my coffee. I let the silence stretch. I'd learned not to rush things. He finally looked up. I wasn't sure you'd come. I shrugged. You offered coffee, not penance. He gave a quiet laugh. Fair enough. For a while, we talked like tourists in each other's lives. I told him about the hiking group. He told me about his therapy sessions. I talked about Gregory. He didn't flinch, just nodded, listening. There were awkward moments, like when he asked if I'd thought about coming back for Christmas. I'm not ready for holidays yet, I said gently. Maybe next year, maybe not. He understood. But then he asked, do you think we'll ever be what we were? And that was the moment. I put down my mug, looked him straight in the eye, and answered with all the clarity the past year had given me. No, and we shouldn't be, because what we were, that wasn't healthy for either of us. He nodded, slowly processing. But what we can be, I continued, is something better. More honest, less dependent. You're not a boy anymore, Ryan, and I'm not your backup generator. He blinked. That's a very specific metaphor. I was an ER nurse for 12 years. I've got metaphors for everything. We both laughed at that real, unguarded laughter. Later, we walked around the neighborhood. The leaves were just starting to turn that perfect crispness in the air like a secret handshake between seasons. I've been thinking Ryan said about how much I used to expect from you. Like I thought your love meant constant sacrifice. That if you ever put yourself first, it meant you were being selfish. Because that's what I taught you, I said without bitterness. I made you the sun and forgot I was supposed to shine too. He stopped walking. That's not on you. I made my own choices. I smiled. Well, look who's been reading his therapist's homework. He rolled his eyes. She's good. We passed a used bookstore and I pointed to it. That's where I found that mystery series you used to love, the one with the detective who always solved crimes by baking. His eyes lit up, the Cinnamon Files. Yep, all 12 books. I bought the whole set. I haven't thought about those in years. We went in and he bought a copy of the first one used with scribbles in the margins. I liked that. Stories lived longer when they carried traces of others. As we walked back to the cafe where he'd left his rental car, he paused at the corner. "You look happy here," he said. "I am. You're different, lighter. I stopped carrying things that weren't mine." He nodded, thoughtful. "Do you think there's still room in your life for me?" "There's always room," I said. "But I'm not leaving space for chaos anymore. You come with peace, or you don't come at all." "I can do that," he said, voice steady. When we said goodbye, it wasn't dramatic. No tears, no long hugs, just a quiet promise to try again. He got in his car and drove away, the taillights fading into the fall dusk. I stood there a moment longer, breathing in the crisp air and listening to the rustle of leaves. I felt no regret, no ache, just presence. The kind that wraps around you gently and says, "You made it." Later that night, I found the old voicemail from months ago, the one I hadn't deleted but couldn't bear to replay. I listened, his voice shaky. "Mom, I messed up. I don't even know how to talk to you anymore, but I miss you. I miss my home." I pressed delete, not out of anger, but because I didn't need to hold on to that pain anymore. We were starting new. One coffee, one walk, one moment at a time. A few mornings later, I opened my front door to find a small box sitting neatly on the doormat. No postage, no label, just my name in Ryan's handwriting. Inside was a single object, the ceramic trinket box shaped like a sunflower I'd once kept on the hallway table back home. Taped to the bottom was a note. "You always said this box was for keeping good memories. I took it when I moved out. I don't even know why. I think I just wanted to hold on to some part of you. I'm giving it back now because I think you're making better memories without me. But I hope someday I'll earn a place in that box again, Ryan." I ran my fingers over the chipped petals, remembering how he used to drop his lunch money inside it before school, claiming it was interest for all the times I covered for him. I placed it on the shelf in my living room, not as a shrine to what had been, but as a quiet signal that maybe, just maybe, something new was taking root. That week, the hiking group planned an overnight retreat at Silver Falls State Park. It had been decades since I'd camped real camping with tents and night sounds and the kind of damp cold that always finds your socks. Gregory offered to drive. We packed his Subaru with more snacks than we'd need, an extra blanket just in case, and a deck of cards that had clearly seen better days. "You sure you're ready for sleeping in a nylon bag in the dirt?" he teased. I raised an eyebrow. "Honey, I once napped in a hospital broom closet during a double shift. I think I'll survive." He laughed and off we went. The first night, after hours of hiking and a truly questionable lentil stew courtesy of Donna, we sat by the fire with mugs of cocoa and stories from our youth. Some were funny, some quietly heartbreaking. When it was my turn, I told the story of the wedding. Not in detail, not with bitterness, but with the calm of someone who's made peace with her own scars. "Someone cut off my hair the night before my son's wedding," I said simply. It wasn't about hair, though. It was about control, about being erased. Everyone was silent. "But the funny thing is," I added with a smile, "that cheap wig I wore, it made me feel like a stranger. And sometimes being a stranger to yourself is exactly what you need to see who you really are underneath." Later, Gregory nudged me as we watched the fire die down. "You ever think about writing all this down your life?" I blinked. "What, like a memoir?" "Sure. Or a blog, or even a YouTube channel. People need stories like yours." I chuckled. "I'm not exactly the influencer type." He tilted his head. "You're real. That's rarer." That night, tucked into my sleeping bag, I stared at the stars through the mesh tent and thought about the idea. My story, not for revenge, not to prove anything, just to tell the truth out loud so someone else might whisper, "Me too." In the days that followed, I bought a secondhand laptop and started writing. Nothing fancy, just mornings at my kitchen table, one word at a time. I called it Silver Roots, a nod to my hair, my age, and the quiet strength I'd grown into. The posts weren't viral. There were no ads or fancy graphics. But the comments started coming from other mothers, from daughters, from women in their 60s who thought their stories didn't matter anymore, from men who said I never realized how much my mother gave up for me. It wasn't fame, it was better. It was connection. It was healing by proxy. One day, I opened my email to find a message from Bellamy. Subject line, "If you'll read this." My stomach clenched. I stared at it for a long time. Then I clicked. "Pet, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from. I've read your blog, or at least I think it's you. The stories match. The tone matches. And if it is you," I wanted to say that I was wrong. So deeply, bitterly wrong. I don't expect forgiveness. But I hope someday you'll believe that I've grown up too. Thank you for teaching me something no one else ever did. That love without respect is just control dressed in nice clothes. I hope you're truly happy. Bellamy. I sat with that email all morning. I didn't reply. Not out of malice. Out of peace. Because some stories don't need sequels. Some doors stay shut not out of punishment, but out of preservation. And I was too busy living my chapter to reread hers. Later that week, Ryan called again. He'd signed up for an art class. Said he wanted to learn how to make something from scratch. I think I've spent too long trying to fix things, he told me. Maybe it's time I just try making something good from the beginning. I smiled. Maybe that's what we were all trying to do. Start again, not from pain, but from possibility. Spring came early that year. The cherry blossoms in Portland bloomed like they were making up for lost time, and the air held that perfect balance of cool breeze and sun-warmed sidewalks. I'd swapped out my thick jackets for light cardigans and found myself smiling more often at strangers. It was a Wednesday when Ryan showed up. No warning, no preamble, just a quiet knock on my front door. I knew it was him before I even opened it. Some things a mother always knows. He stood there, hands in the pockets of a windbreaker, eyes darting between the welcome mat and my face. "You said coffee," he said. "I figured today was a good day." I nodded and stepped aside. The coffee was already brewing. We didn't hug right away, that felt too big. Instead, we sat at the kitchen table, me in my usual chair, him in the one Gregory had started using when he visited. "You've changed this place," he said, glancing around. "I've changed a lot of things." He nodded slowly. "You look happy." I smiled. "I am." We sipped our coffee in a silence that wasn't awkward, just cautious. Two people feeling the shape of a bridge they hadn't crossed in years. I read every post he said quietly, twice. I waited. "You didn't spare me." "No," I said. "I couldn't." "Good," he said. "I don't deserve sparing." For the first time, he looked me in the eye and didn't flinch. "You know what hurts the most?" he asked. "It's not what I did. It's that you knew me better than I knew myself, and I still chose someone who didn't know me at all." "That's not the part that hurts me," I said softly. He blinked. "It's not." "No, the part that hurt was realizing that I let myself disappear. I made your life the center of my own. And somewhere in the process, I stopped being a person to you and to myself." He put down his mug. "I want to know you again, Mom. Not out of guilt, not out of duty, but because I finally see you." And then he reached across the table, covering my hand with his. "I don't want to fix the past," he said. "I just want to be better in the future." I looked at our hands. His was bigger now, stronger a man's hand, but it still had the same crooked pinky from when he broke it, playing baseball in 5th grade. I turned mine palm up, curling my fingers around his. "I think I said we can try." The following weeks were quiet, not dramatic, not full of teary reunions or big proclamations, just steady. Ryan and I walked the river path on Sunday afternoons. He helped me carry donations to the food bank. We swapped recipes. We argued over who made better meatloaf. Bellamy. She was no longer in the picture. That Ryan told me one evening over Chinese takeout had ended months ago. Peacefully, but finally. Turns out, when someone stops believing they're better than you, they don't have a reason to stay, he said. I didn't cheer or gloat. Just passed him a fortune cookie and said, "New chapter." And it was. In mid-May, my blog post about the wedding, the one I'd titled "The Wig That Broke Me," started gaining traction. Slowly at first. A few shares, a few kind comments, then suddenly, thousands. I didn't know why it resonated then, why it reached people months after I posted it. But it did. Emails flooded in, not just from women like me, but from young men, from daughters, from people estranged from their parents who said they finally understood what love looked like when it was taken for granted. A week later, a producer from a podcast reached out. She asked if I'd be willing to come on and talk about reclaiming yourself after motherhood. I laughed for 3 solid minutes before agreeing. Just don't expect me to have all the answers, I warned. We don't want answers, she said. We want honesty. So I gave them honesty. And you know what? It felt good. It felt really good. One night, Gregory and I sat under the stars in his backyard, a bottle of red wine between us. You've become quite the local celebrity, he teased, nudging my shoulder. I haven't let it go to my head, I said with mock seriousness. Yet. We laughed, fell quiet, watched the moon rise. He turned toward me. I know you're in no rush. I know you've done this whole new life thing on your terms. I raised an eyebrow, but I'd like to be part of it, officially. I blinked. Are you proposing? He held up his hands. No rings, no rush, just an invitation to whatever comes next. I smiled, reached out, and took his hand. I think I said we can try. Life didn't get perfect. The ache still came. Some nights I missed my old garden. Some mornings I thought about Bellamy and felt a flicker of sadness, not for her, but for the years I spent trying to win her kindness. But then I'd take a walk with Ryan or get a call from someone touched by my writing or watch Gregory fix my crooked porch light like it was an act of love, and I'd remember I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living, fully, freely, finally. The rain came later that night, gentle and steady, the kind that taps against the windows like a lullaby. I stood in the kitchen with a mug of tea, watching the city soften under the glow of street lamps and storm clouds. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. Just quiet peace humming beneath the surface of everything. And that's the thing I learned most of all. Healing doesn't arrive with fireworks or apologies. It comes in the small things, a sincere text, a quiet dinner laughter shared over burnt toast. It's choosing to build something new instead of mourning what's lost. It's deciding again and again that your worth was never defined by who left or who failed to see you. Who? I spent years trying to be the perfect mother, the supportive in-law, the silent presence in the background. But when the silence got too loud, I finally learned how to listen to myself. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you are there now, standing in a kitchen, staring at a past that no longer fits, wondering if it's too late to change. It's not. I promise you it's not. Because you are still here. Still breathing, still holding the pen. And the page is wide open. Tonight I hope you remember this story not because it was mine, but because some part of it, however small, was yours too. You deserve peace. You deserve joy. You deserve a life where your voice isn't just heard, it's valued. So wherever you are on your couch, in bed, with your phone glowing softly, or listening quietly with headphones, I'm grateful you stayed until the end. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Watch the screen for 2 other stories I think you'll love. They're waiting just for you. Good night.